stall, give them your visiting card, and later in the evening, we will have a lucky draw to pick one person who will then get 2-night, 3 days free holiday package. Terms and conditions apply. Right then, the exciting session before lunch is titled Accountancy Profession Meeting Stakeholders' Expectations. I'd like to invite on stage the panelists now. Please welcome first Dr. R.S. Sodhi, Managing Director with Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation Limited, Amul. This is India's largest food products organization. Dr. Sodhi, please come on stage. Dr. Sodhi has nearly 4 decades of rich experience in developing cooperative sector, and he's been mentored by none other than a lot of years you've spent with Dr. Verghese Kurian. We remember him today, the father of white revolution. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Amul. I'd like to invite on stage Ms. Fiona Wilkinson, please. Fiona Wilkinson is the president with the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. Thank you, ma'am, for your gracious presence in ICI's International Conference. May I invite on stage CA Ved Jain ji, past president ICI. He's been on the board of IFAC, the global body for the accountancy profession. Ved ji has been vice president with ASSOCHAM, and of course a very familiar face on media as well, helping simplifying things for the masses. And to moderate the session, please welcome with a round of applause CA Pankaj Jain, past council member, ICI. Accountancy profession, meeting stakeholders' expectation. It's over to the session moderator, CA Pankaj Jain. Thank you.
Good day to all of you. I'm quite sure that all of you would be waiting very anxiously for this extremely important session on the accountancy profession, meeting the stakeholder expectations, something which always is very intriguing, and it's like a moving goalpost with the expectations changing so furiously and in a much, much bigger way, especially in the light of many corporate failures which we have had in the past. The scrutiny of the audit profession has increased, and the expectation gaps, which normally are always changing, we need to be very clear as to how we are tuning to meet that. Apart from the accuracy of financial statements, generally the expectation gaps are in 3 areas. That is fraud, internal control, going concern. And as in the last decade, the corporate reporting landscape has become a mosaic of mandatory and voluntary disclosures under various standards and frameworks. The result is complexity and reporting that fails to meet expectations of investors and other stakeholders. Convergence towards relevant, reliable, and comparable narrative information and matrix is desperately needed. And what do we expect? We have extremely 3 luminaries as panelists today. We have one who is heading a highly successful cooperative in the public sector, Mr. Sodhi. We have the president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, Ms. Fiona Wilkinson. And we have our own past president, Mr. Ved Jain, somebody whom I had the good fortune of working with in the council. So the way we'll structure this panel discussion is that we'll give all the 3 panelists first ample time, say about 10 to 12 minutes, to make their opening remarks, after which we'll have a session of question and answers. And if you have any advanced questions, please send it. We'll try and see whether we have time to accommodate them. So without any further ado, I would first request the only lady on the panel and somebody who's come up all the way from London, Madam President Fiona Wilkinson. Please, if you can give your opening remarks.
Thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, I come from the UK, as has been said, and I really thought I'd start by talking about the audit expectation gap, because audit is in the spotlight in the UK in a way that I have never known it throughout all my working life. I mean, I can remember when I was studying, learning about the audit expectation gap, and I know it's been around since the 19th century. But we've had several fairly high-profile corporate failures in the UK. You know, a high street shop like British Home Stores. But the thing that really catalysed everybody, and I mean virtually everyone in the country, into thinking about audit was the collapse of Carillion PLC, which I'm sure you've all heard of, which happened in January 2018. And there were several reasons why it caught the public's attention, not only because it is the largest liquidation that we've ever had in the UK. It had revenues of 5.2 billion. It had 43,000 employees, of whom 19,000 were in the UK. It had a lot of pensioners in its pension scheme. It used subcontractors who were all affected by this and other suppliers. But it wasn't only because it was large, it's because a lot of the work that it did was government outsourcing. So, for example, Carillion was building Crossrail, which is a new railway line going from a town called Reading, which is well west of London, right out to Essex in the east. So this is a very important new railway line, part underground, part overground. The population of London has been growing fairly exponentially, and a new railway line is really needed. So suddenly the public realised that their new railway line, which they had been expecting, is now delayed and is not going to open at least until 2021. The public also noticed because Carillion was building two lovely shiny new hospitals in Liverpool and Birmingham, two of our biggest cities outside London. So the public, who'd been putting up with National Health Service hospitals that were out of date and outmoded, could see these lovely new hospitals going up, and suddenly construction stops. And people who had operations booked in the new hospitals were suddenly having to go into old hospitals and having their operations delayed. So suddenly this came to the attention of the public, and auditing was on the front page of the newspapers for all the wrong reasons. And it's typical, isn't it? You never get a headline that says 10,000 excellent audits were performed this year, but one goes wrong in a big way, and the public is aware. And so the public, and journalists in particular, and our Business Select Committee in Parliament started asking questions about what do auditors do, what is the scope of audit, and where has it all gone wrong. And it's put a very difficult spotlight on the profession. And I'm not here to justify poor audit work. I think there clearly was poor audit work on Carillion. But it is managing the expectations of the public. And the way the press is speaking at the moment, or has spoken over the past 2 years, it puts the auditors right in the firing line. And it seems to think that auditors are responsible for corporate failures. So certainly something that my institute is doing, and I'm trying to do when I speak on this topic, is make it very clear that when companies fail, primarily these are failures of corporate governance. These are directors making poor decisions, or directors being greedy. Directors' remuneration has come in the spotlight. So really, the corporate governance and the directors are the first line of defence, if you like. Secondly, we're talking about a listed company here. We're talking about audit committees and the effectiveness of audit committees, and indeed the effectiveness of chairs. And I think what has been thrown up by Carillion is that some audit committees really were not doing their jobs, and that some audit committee chairs were not as good as they should have been. They were not necessarily people who were really experienced in business and financial reporting, so there have been some changes there. And then really, and there's also internal audit, of course, which is required for listed entities, and then we get to the external auditors. So it is very much trying to manage expectations. I think as auditors, we're always in the firing line because we're the people who hold the professional indemnity insurance. So we're the people who it's very easy to sue if you've lost some money when a company fails. But we are, you know, we're not the prime culprits. And we've had other corporate failures subsequently, very sadly. We had Thomas Cook this year, a very large holiday company. Again, the sort of company that's really well known to the public. It's the oldest holiday, was the oldest holiday company in the UK. And I actually had people say to me, where were the auditors? What were the auditors doing over Thomas Cook? Well, the auditors, to a large extent, had done the right thing. If anyone had looked at the financial statements of Thomas Cook, there is a great big going concern paragraph in the auditor's report, which made it pretty clear that the auditors thought Thomas Cook was unlikely to continue trading for the next 12 months. But they should have done a bit more because there was also $1 billion of intangibles in the balance sheet. And I think if you put in an emphasis of matter on going concern, you need to start to think, are these intangibles worth anything? So that's another matter. But if people read the financial statements, it's really quite clear what's going on. But I think the public now have, and government have, and the press have big expectations of auditors, partly because they don't totally understand what we do, but we do need to turn that on its head really, and I think explain more what we do and the limits of audit work, because we really are reliant on management being honest with us over things like going concern, which was referred to, but the auditors definitely need to be more challenging and more sceptical when questioning management about areas of judgment and estimate and matters like going concern. So certainly in the UK, this has all led to several reviews, as I'm sure you all know. The Kingman Review, I think the Bryden Review is very pertinent to this. Sir Donald Bryden is looking at the very scope and purpose of audit and what should assurance be, what level of assurance should there be, and how to communicate to stakeholders. So we are awaiting the result of his report, which should be published next month. And I think it's not only the UK that's looking at this. I know, for example, there are a lot of people in India who are very interested in the result of this review, as indeed they are around the world, because I think what is being questioned is not just audit work in the UK, but it's whether auditing standards, international auditing standards are fit for purpose. And we all start from the same international auditing standards. We add bits to them in the UK. I know you add bits to them in India. But the fundamentals come from the International Auditing and Assurance Board. And I expect a lot of you are aware that the monitoring group, which consists of people like the Basel Banking Commission, the EU, the World Bank, they have said that auditing standards are not fit for purpose and that they should be completely revised. But again, there's a bit of paralysis going on there while a remedy is being found, if you like. So I think perhaps just to conclude my opening remarks, I think I would just say there's clearly an expectation gap with respect to audit work. I think as a profession, we really have to make sure that we do have auditing standards that are fit for purpose. But I do think we need to keep explaining really what an audit is, what it does, and the fact that it cannot prevent companies from collapsing. And indeed, I don't think we would want that. I mean, if we live in a capitalist society, which we certainly do in the UK, a normal part of that is for companies to fail and for other companies to start up. So we have a big, I think, piece of education work to do on closing the audit expectation gap. I'll pass on, I think, to one of my colleagues here.
Thank you, Fiona, for your insight, especially coming from a very global and perspective. Now, I would request Mr. Mr. R.S. Sodi to please give his opening remarks. He has a presentation to make, so I'll request him to please take the podium.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, this is the first time I'm interacted with the accounting professionals. So I had a glimpse sitting here listening to Dr. Girish Ahuja when he was giving you sermons for tax. So being a marketing man, I was thinking that we always think how to create demand, how to create markets. And for you accounting professional, I think the best way to create demand or creating marketing is asking government to make more complex laws. So they get customers, clients get more confused, and they, like we get dengue, we go to the doctor. So that pharma company may be trying to create demand by creating more dengue, more jo hote hai machhar. So for you, dengue is basically more complex laws. So coming to this topic of meeting stakeholder expectations, so I don't know whether you had this exposure, how much to the cooperative of being working last 38 years in the milk cooperative of 36 lakh farmers of mainly Gujarat. So my talk or my all answers will be pertaining to that side. So when you talk about stakeholders, who are our stakeholders? For any corporate, stakeholders are people who put their money in the equity to earn some money or a business or do business. I mean, for them, it's a business. But for a cooperative, who are the stakeholders? For Amul, stakeholders are 36 lakh poor farmers. For them, this company is basically linking them, they produce to the market. For them, this is not a business. When they own the Amul, 36 lakh farmers, for them it's a source of livelihood. It's not a business for them. So you have to differentiate between business and livelihood. Business means surplus you are putting to earn something back. Here they're not putting money. They want good price. And they participate fully. And this 365 days. Generally any stakeholder will put money and then just watch on the TV or on the computer what is returned. Here twice in a day they interact, they do transaction with the company and they get the money back. Company AGMs like this, and you see the AGM, without caste, creed, region, all people, all farmers participate in the AGM and take the major decisions. So, expectations of these stakeholders would be entirely different than the expectations of a corporate shareholders. That is what I want to, and I'll tell you what exactly are their expectations. In India, around 10 crore rural households or 100 million rural households in dairy. 70% of them are small and marginal, not paying tax at all. Not in that. Now coming to the dairy. This slide is very important. You'll understand the context. And this is a slide after showing to the concerned people, you know, the RCEP was withdrawn. This is the slide. Till mid-70s in dairy, we were 1/3 of USA, 1/8 of Europe, dependent on imports, equal to Netherlands, Australia. And you see where are today? Today we are world largest producer of milk, 186. 2 times bigger than the USA, and milk sold around 15 to 20% more than whole of Europe. And fastest growing. It's not only we are the 4.5 to 5% annual CAGR growth, fastest in the world, and also world's biggest market. So we are the largest in production, biggest market, and fastest growing. And all by the small milk producers, around 100 millions. So this is what when we show to the policy maker that we are doing so good, why you want to change it, why you want to tinker it. And other countries are more or less there. In India, if you talk about dairy industry, it is around, we are 20% of the world, 7 lakh crore is the dairy industry. No other industry is as big as this. 7 lakh crore per annum. But whatever milk is produced, 40% is retained by the milk producers, 60% is surplus. Out of the 60% surplus, only 1/3 is coming to the organized, 2/3 small people, unorganized sector. And Amul may be number one, But we handle around 6 to 7% of Indian milk production, but 27% of organized sector. And what you say achieved mainly because of a very good cooperative structure, which Dr. Varghese Kurian duplicated or replicated all over India. And what is that Amul model? Amul model is simple, that farmers not only will produce the product, but process and market it under their own brand name. So whole supply chain production to the end consumer is owned by the farmer, so that they get the maximum portion of consumer spending. So bottom of, there are around in Amul 3.6 million producer, around 18,000 village cooperative society. Producer are giving milk in village cooperative society, which is paying based on quality and quantity. Then milk is coming to district union where processing plants are there. Milk is converted into various value-added products under the Amul brand name. And the state level milk marketing federation is there, which is marketing product all over India and abroad. And then to the consumer. But this whole structure is owned by the farmers, not a single penny equities with any government. So we are not a PSU, let me tell you. Neither government or any other private enterprise. 100% equity is owned by 3.6 million farmers, and every shareholder is going to one share, and which is not tradable. And today, Amul is India's biggest FMCG or food company. Last year, 45,000 crore. This year, it will be 52,000 crore per annum. It is the biggest, but owned by small 3.6 million farmers. We are 9th in the world. About 7 years back, we were 20th. The way we are growing will be number 3 in the next 5 years. But this is very important. This is the slide which you saw. Our reason is this. Nowhere in the world, all developed country, farmers get only 1/3 what consumer pay. In India, farmers getting 70 to 80. In India, Amul 80 to 86%, otherwise 70 to 75. Farmers get what you pay in Bombay. Price for a liter of milk, suppose 44 rupees for taza, 80% goes to the farmer. Nowhere in the world. That is why farmers in India. So, what is farmers is very stable and remunerative price. So what way we are different than the conventional model? What way our stakeholders are different? One is simple. You all try how to maximize bottom line. As a CEO of a cooperative, I try how to minimize the bottom line. So owners are the suppliers. You see, we buy our raw material, which is 90% of the cost, from our owners. So they are not interested in dividend. They want good price for the produce. So value for many, how to give very stable and remunerative price to 3.6 million producer as well as supplier as the owner. And also value for money, selling best quality product at such an affordable price that whatever raw material is offered to us, we are able to buy, process and sell it. So end of the day, my performance is not measured by the bottom line or the top line. My performance is measured how much minimum EBITDA I have kept. How much as high price I have purchased the raw material, at such a price I have sold that end of the day, how much minimum EBITDA, the gross profit we have kept. Any other company, they like to, once a product is successful, how to reduce the cost of production. In Amul, we have never tried to reduce the cost of production by replacing expensive ingredients with the cheap ingredient, adding more. Like in food, what is that? You replace dairy fat, which is 400 rupees kg, with the palm oil, which is 70 rupees kg, or add more sugar, or add some, replace milk protein with the maltodextrin or soya protein. Never. That is why our taste, what butter you taste today is 55 years back the same recipe. We do not have, I mean, any food company with a new product development, we do not have new product development people, 300, 400. Shop floor people, we give them any product idea, they develop own recipes, and within 3 months after getting the idea, new product is introduced. All companies have multiple brands, so many children. I mean, for morning, there is a different brand of soap, evening something different, for the high-end different, low-end different, middle class. But for butter, whether you are at Pedder Road you're in a village like Dakor, same Amul butter, same Amul ice cream. It's the image of the product. And naturally, when you have got one child versus 100 child or 50 children, expenses, you need more money. So advertising spend in other food or FMCG company, 5 to 12%, you know, our advertising spend has been always less than 1%, but even less than 1%, we are able to be top of the mind of our target segment. And generally, people say you have to get the best talent from the industry to run your company, hunt for them, grab them. But let me tell you, in the Amul, we don't hire people from the outside. We just get the people when they're just out of the college, we motivate, retain them. And you'll see, like I'm with this company for last 38 years, my whole top team are on their first job only. People come and they stay with us. Other corporates generate employment in the urban cities. We generate employment in the rural India. So that is, lot of opportunities, lot of schemes are coming to generate employment. Dairy or animal husbandry is the one sector which is generating employment in the rural India. And what is this initiative of stakeholder? What we call it, what business we are in? We are in business of C2C, cow to consumer. But owned by farmers only, and usually the number of transactions, 7.2 million transactions every day. All channel members are involved on daily basis. And also this supply chain, what we call it, food distribution, no other company in India has got. Generally people have supply chain ambient product. In fresh, in case of dairy, we have got supply chain for fresh product, that is milk and buttermilk, for frozen product, as well as ambient product, and chilled product, butter and cheese. To have more transparency, there is an app system where farmers, when they give milk in the cooperative, so they get the information on there, how much milk, how much money has been credited, what was the fat and etc. Totally, a system is for the stakeholders very, very transparent. 6 lakh farmers have now started using app on daily basis. And for distribution of products like other FMCG, we got distribution management system where salesman is booking order from the shop and directly goods are delivered. This is just slides. So what are the stakeholder expectations as far as cooperative? First is in cooperative system, because the state subject, there are no uniform accounting procedure. But like in corporate, there are standard formats for balance sheet or profit and loss. There's nothing like in cooperatives. Each state, each cooperative has got its own system presenting the accounts. That is the requirement. Because then you don't know what is hidden. Where are the inefficiencies? So one area is that. Then perception. Cooperative means old, inefficient, conservative, and a lot of problems, especially in Bombay with a lot of cooperatives failing. Then cooperative versus corporate. I was hearing Dr. Girish Ahuja that he was talking how from 30% to 22%. Do you know in cooperative what are the tax structure now? We are paying 10% more tax than the you people or any corporate world. We are still paying 30% per surcharge, etc., 35%. So whereas all corporate are paying. So a shareholder of a company on Pedder Road is paying 25%, or a farmer in Sandesar village is paying 35% income tax. Reason is people are not aware what is corporate. They don't think people at the policy level know anything. There is a business structure exists like cooperative. Among the CAs also what we have found is there is a lack of depth knowledge of State Cooperative Act. Because there's a cooperative audit is also now divided. Some part is given to the CAs, some part to the government department, and generally awareness among the laws, corporate laws are lacking, especially among the CAs. So how to attract professional corporate, that is another area. People are scared of a young professional, talented professional, slightly scared of working corporate, so that is our challenge. This is the final from Dr. Verghese Kurian quote. And before I end with this one, I want to say that expectations of stakeholders, and stakeholders besides the shareholders are also the consumer. And our learning of last 63 years of Amul is that if you give more to shareholders as well as to the consumer, means suppliers and the consumer, you are going to earn. So give more to earn more.
मेरो गाम काठा पाड़े जा दूध की नदियां बहे जा कोयल डोको गाए मारे घर अंगना ना भूलो ना रे मारे घर अंगना ना भूलो ना ओ मारे गाम की मक्खन रोटी लाए खुशियां छोटी छोटी खुश रहे तेरा बेटा बेटी जैसे चमके हीरा मोती तेरे आंचल में तेरे चेहरे की ये लाली लाए मारे मन उजाली आंगन आंगन है खुशहाली मारे घर झांझर लक्ष्मी के बाजे मारे घर झांझर लक्ष्मी के बाजे
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Sodi. Thank you so much, sir, for giving such a good insight about what good work you're doing. I'm quite confident that every citizen of this country is really proud of your federation and especially the work it's doing to empowering women in the rural areas. Thank you so much. And now we have someone who's always, a person everybody is very keen to listen to, our lovable, popular past president, Mr. Ved Jain.
Thank you, Pankaj, for the compliments. Good afternoon, friends. We have a very interesting and challenging topic for this international conference, and which is rightly suited for this occasion. Accounting profession, expectations of the stakeholders. Friends, when we look at this theme today and the topic today, it has 5 words. Meeting stakeholder expectation, accounting profession. Accounting profession is a profession which has assumed a role over a period. I would just like to take you down the history from where this accounting got developed. Some of you may have applied your mind, may have read something on net, etc. What I could find it out, when the human being came into, I think, civilization got developed, it was an individual doing it oneself. No accounting was required. The need for accounting arose when people started building temple, society. Many people contributing money to a one cause, simple cause, where many people became a stakeholders and there was a one organizer or a people taker. And there the need arose that there need to be accounting. What people are contributing, what people are spending, they need to be there. This got developed long time back. We have a long history. We have a Chanakya and others where all this got developed. But the formal way of accounting, I believe, got started developing in the 19th century. And we had the first accounting professional body way back, of course, in Glasgow in 1850, and which was taken over later on in 1880 by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, whose president happens to be here today with us here in India. Over a period, accounting profession, by its own desire, by its own aggression, by its own convincing, went one after the other assuming role. From simple accounting to auditing. Pure arithmetic, we say this way. Accountant is also, I believe, is accountable. Expectation of accountant that he will do a good accounting. 2 + 2 will be always 4 by him and not 5. And thereafter, we as an accounting profession conversed with the society, conversed with the regulator, conversed with the government authorities, that we are the right people to certify and say what is there is correct. And over a period, we have created what we call a euphoria or a hype in the society on the regulator, that once we have certified one's account, there is nothing wrong in it. This expectation we have created. And over a period, by having created this expectation, the stakeholders have increased. Earlier, our liability, our responsibility was to the owners, which happened to be the proprietor or the partners or the shareholders, that's all. But now we find that the stakeholders have increased. It is not limited to the owners, it is to the people who are financing. It is the people who are supplying. It is the people who are buying. I was just looking at the slides of this Amul, where 36 lakh farmers are dependent on this Amul. Something going wrong with the corporate. Who are the stakeholders? These 36 lakh people are the stakeholders of this Amul. And that responsibility lies on our shoulders and our accountant. And that's why you see, when we look at the accounting profession, meeting the expectation of the stakeholders, so we need to keep in mind that these are the stakeholders to whom we need to address while discharging our function as an accountant. Having created this type of a situation, having created this type of expectation, now we are at a crossroad where we are finding it difficult how to match these expectations. I recall way back in 2008, when I was the president, and I filed a nomination for the board of the IFAC. And I was called for an interview to Madrid, Spain. And when I entered the interview board, there were 6 gentlemen sitting across that table. I, being from India, I was straight away put a question: what is the challenge to the accounting profession? And I still recall what answer I have given. My answer was, and that time, it was told to me that India will not be nominated on the board because you rotate your nomination too frequently and you are not likely the candidate. I was one of the very reluctant person to go to Madrid, but the then secretary persuaded me that you must go, you must have a chance, why to lose that opportunity? And when I answered this question, I said, the biggest challenge to the accounting profession is the expectation gap between the auditor and the society. Society expects, once the accounts have been certified, anything going wrong, auditor is responsible, he is liable. And the auditor says, I discharge my responsibility in accordance with a set of the accounting principle and auditing procedures. I'm not responsible for that. And I say, there's a very wide expectation gap, and this challenge will be there. And I believe what I said in 2008, which helped me in getting that nomination in the IFAC board, ultimately I was one of the persons who got nominated because of this answer I gave that day. And I believe today we are facing the same challenge which has come to us just like on front of us. We had a long time back in 2009 Satyam, but recent past in 3-4 years, we had the PNB, Nirav Modi case. We have the PMC now in the bank happening in Mumbai. We had Kingfisher going on. We have the ILFS going on. We have the DHFL going on. All those issues have come up, and there the various stakeholders are finding it and asking questions from the auditors what to do, and where we are and what we need to do and how we do, and what needs to move forward. If we now look at the principles, the auditors carries out its responsibility in accordance with the accounting principles, or according to which the accounts have to be prepared, and those need to be examined and audited in accordance with the audit procedure which have been prescribed. And we do carry out this exercise. And there is a society which says nothing doing. So one need to be very careful about this and need to propagate this message very loudly and clearly. Auditor is not an insurer. Auditor is not a guarantor. When we charge our audit fees, we do not charge guarantee fees that in case anything goes wrong, we will be responsible. We do not provide an insurance. We express an opinion on the set of accounts which have been prepared by the management. That's our responsibility for life. Now, if that be the case, what I will use the word hype and the expectation which we have created among the society and the regulator and the government need to be brought down. And there is a need for that all accounting bodies, right from IFAC at the headquarters and the other accounting bodies in the world, including ICI, need to take it head on to make society and the regulators aware that an auditor is not an insurer, not an auditor is not a guarantor. He is only giving an opinion on a set of accounts. Unless the society and regulator realizes this expectation will go on and this problem will continue to be flogged. That's a major, major challenge which I am saying it. May be difficult. In case we believe as a professional body that auditor can do something more what he can do, then the technique need to be improved, which I believe continuously is being addressed to and being taken care of. But at the same time, this expectation of insurer guarantor need to be addressed very, very firmly on that part, that this is the role what he plays. Because what we see, what auditors does and what a society believes the auditor has done, there's a wide gap. Now, how you will educate it? Education will happen in a seminar, conferences where you call regulator, where you call all these people and tell what this audit is and how it is carrying out. You write article, you write working and what is done. Simply saying on a reported report that the accounts have been prepared by the management, we are expressing an opinion, legally may be right, but the perception does not change. That's the issue one need to be addressed. And the second aspect which need to be taken care as a profession is, when anything goes wrong, I divide that wrong can be into three parts. One, where the person where the wrong has happened has a knowledge and is an active partner. If that be case, it's a criminal case, it's a fraud case, there cannot be any concession on that part. It has nothing to do with accounting profession or auditing profession. It is a conspiracy or it is a criminal activity which has been done. As a part of a routine society, if one or two does, the law has to take its course. Nothing can be done, neither by the accounting profession, neither by the regulators, because it is a criminal activity. That's a separate issue. Second part is what a professional was required to do, which he had failed to carry out. Where we use the word negligence or a gross negligence. There is a standard. Had he applied those norms, had he discharged a responsibility, he would have been able to find it out and to dig it out. There the problem arises. One is a civil liability which arises under the ICI Act, disciplinary mechanism, he can be barred, etc. But at the same time, we must not ignore there is a criminal breach of trust. A trust has been reposed in that accounts and this side which have been certified. And that trust has been belied. And if that be there is a criminal breach of trust, and then there can be a criminal liability. So we need to be aware while discharging our responsibility that this expectation of the society is the right expectation to that level, that what you could have digged out as an auditor, you have failed to carry out that responsibility, and there is a gross negligence which has caused damage to the various stakeholders, then the problem is there. We need to be clear. And the third is, neither there is a conspiracy, neither there is a gross negligence, but things have happened which was not at all in the hand. Nobody could have digged it out. Without expressing any judgment, I believe the PNB case, if I take it, is one of the cases like this. If somebody has issued a guarantee on a piece of paper which is not accounted for anywhere, nobody could have digged it out that somebody has done this liability which is arising thereon. There we need to say, yes, this type of situation cannot be addressed on that part. And for that purpose, regulator and accounting bodies have to work and develop what can be the way out for such type of a situation. Because the government of the day will like to find out that if there is a possibility that something can go wrong, which according to your auditing and accounting standard could not be digged out, but there is a possibility how to address that problem. I give a common example. If there are diseases which various medicine doctors have been able to identify and diagnose it out, no issue. But there is any disease or something problem which no doctor is able to find it out, then the government will try to find out that who are the best people to do it. So this is for the accounting bodies to look into that. If this type of situation arises, then what need to be done? And I believe the short answer, immediate answer, which has come up recent past, the difference between audit and a forensic audit. That addresses that issue, that where criminality, this type of situation arises, that forensic audit is the case, and in what cases and sample basis or what areas one need to take care of this forensic audit so that those type of problems get addressed there all. That's a challenge which accounting profession on the part of it need to be worked it out. So unless we address each and these type of problem in the manner which I'm saying that we segregate one part, we segregate the other part, the accounting profession will continue to be having the gap, meeting the expectation gap. And another aspect which need to be clear is the accounting profession limited to auditing only? Because when we talk of accountancy profession and we said anything going wrong with the audit, the whole of the accounting profession is brushed with a black paint. We have, I think in India, 300,000 chartered accountants. I don't believe more than 10,000 or 15,000 are in a test function. Rest of them are in other areas. Maybe in taxation, maybe in finance, maybe in management, maybe in pure accounting, maybe in advisory, maybe in consultation, etc. Our role as accounting profession is not, are we not meeting the expectation of the societies? This complex tax law which we were talking about the session before, who are the people who are advising and making the solutions? Who are the best link between the taxpayer and the government about these complex tax laws? Who are the people who encourage people to pay taxes because otherwise they will be in trouble, and explain and win the confidence of the taxpayer and allow and promote and encourage to pay the taxes? India introduced GST way back in 2017. Had the GST been successful without the contribution and the role played by the accountancy profession? Are we not meeting the expectation of the society in that directions? Society, I believe, include regulators and the government and the public at all. Is it not a service rendered to the society? Do we believe our corporate peoples who are working at a top level in the various corporates, are they not contributing the wealth and the economy of the country? Are not they partner in the nation building? They are the contributor of the society. So it is not the only expectation, what we say, meeting the expectation of the stakeholder. We as an accounting body need to focus on this area, that the role is of accounting, auditing role is there important, but that role is one part of the role of the, I believe, the total, I said 10% of the total role, etc. And even in that part, there is a segregation that 99% of the issues are being taken care of, being addressed. 1% exception happens, and that exception can also be divided into three parts. One part is where there is a criminality, no exceptions. One, there is a gross negligence, no concession. And third is where nobody can find it out. Why the profession should be blamed for that part? I think the President Wilkinson was referring to when one or two things happens, the profession comes under challenge, and people forget about 99% other good things happening. So that is where we are seeing we need to be a little optimistic, but at the same time, dynamic and making it effort that perception in the society, which we call expectation from our profession, we need to take care and address it very, very vigorously in various platforms so that society, regulator, and the government understand that the expectation is only to this level. Beyond this level, you cannot expect from the accounting profession. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, sir. Only Mr. Ved Jain can speak with the intensity which we just saw. Thank you so much, sir, for your lovely words. We have a few questions for our panelists. I know that we are way beyond schedule, but when the incoming flight is delayed, then the pilot tries that at least we can make up some time in the air. So we'll try and make it as quick as possible. Madam President, you mentioned regarding the need to explain what exactly is the auditor's role, and there have been some committees also in the House of Commons which are trying to do that. According to you, as an accounting regulator, as an accounting body, what should be the manner, frequency, and nature of this type of communications accounting bodies should be doing so that the expectation gap to that extent is understood and minimized?
Okay, well, I can tell you what we're doing at the ICAW. We've written a thought leadership piece, which I've brought a copy here if anybody's interested in looking at it, called What Auditors Do, the Scope of the Audit. And it's written in very plain English because it's intended for anybody who's interested to be able to read it. It's available free on the ICAW's website, so if you go to icaw.com you can find it if you're interested in it. So we've done that, but we've done a lot more. Our CEO does a blog roughly every month, and most of those over the last 2 years he's spoken about audit. We have an audit and assurance faculty, which again, any of you can join. You don't have to be one of our members, you can join if you're interested. But the Audit and Assurance faculty every month does an email newsletter out to its members, and again that gives advice on how the scope of audit can be explained to people's clients and to other interested parties. We also do webinars which are open to other people, and newsletters. So we're trying to produce a lot of information so that our members and other people who've joined our faculty are informed and can disseminate relevant information out to the public. But it's, you know, it is hard work.
And how frequently do you actually have meetings with the government or any other regulators to explain them, apart from keeping this on the web?
Oh, well, they're as required really, but they've been very frequent. I mean, we've had people appear before the Business Select Committee in
Yes.
Parliament, explaining what we do and what an audit is. We have public policy people who talk to people in government. We have very, very regular contact with our regulator, the Financial Reporting Council. I mean, our chief executive has a very good relationship there. I mean, the two people at the head of the FRC, the CEO and the chair, following all of this and following the Kingman review into the role of the FRC, they have resigned. And we have two new people there, Simon Dingemans, who comes from the Stock Exchange, and John Thompson, who comes from HMRC. They are both people that we know well, and our CEO made sure that each had a letter on his desk the day they arrived, and Michael Itz has been to see them and talk to them, and we're keeping an ongoing dialogue going. So we're really trying as much as we can, A, to forge relationships, and B, just to keep people informed really about audit and what an audit is.
Thank you so much. I think that's the need of the hour. Sir, you mentioned in one of your slides that there should be uniform accounting as far as cooperatives are concerned. As the head of a very highly successful cooperative, and especially when you are saying that you are the one not interested in the bottom line, what are your expectations from the accountancy profession, especially the ICAI, in terms of what type of uniformity would you prefer to be brought in through regulations or standards for uniforming the accounting, as well as the approach to audit, as you said, that some are done by CAs, some are done by the government officers?
You see, like I said, cooperative business structure is a state subject. Within also state, there are different structures for cooperative, and all are under the registrar cooperative. Like in case of Gujarat, there are, we are registered under Gujarat State Cooperative Act, but one can also register in the multi-state cooperative under the central registrar. Earlier, our audit used to be done by the government auditors, but with the SAP coming, computerized system coming, and they want to understand, so divided audit into two parts. Financial audit by the chartered accountant, reporting to the government auditor, because final audit report is submitted by the government. And government auditor is doing cooperative audit, basically whether what bylaws, what board meetings, etc., etc. What we have found is there, generally, because chartered accountant submitting his report to the government auditor, sometimes the type of auditing needs to be done, detailing to be done is not there. See here, it is not auditing of a business. It's a auditing of the source of livelihood of millions of people. So one laxity, one mistake, one ignorance can snatch livelihood of people. Secondly, I said earlier also, there are no fixed formats for presenting the profit and loss or the balance sheet or annexure, what to be given in the printed balance sheet, not to be given. So each corporate is deciding what to give based on the recommendation by the chartered. So we expect ICAI to at least give advisory to all the chartered accountants that whenever they do any audit of cooperative, this should be the format, this should be annexure. So all information is there and transparency.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure the office bearers of ICAI are listening to this, and I'm quite sure that they would obviously do their best in trying to bring out standards or something which can be then recommended to the government to make it as a framework for preparation of accounts as well as for doing the audit. Past President, sir, you very rightly mentioned about society needs to understand exactly what type of mistakes or could be there for audit failures. A failure obviously is a failure. You can't do anything about that. But when especially it's a corporate failure, then the role of the auditor is always questioned, that what did he do? But sir, I am intrigued to ask you that you have seen the evolution of the entire profession for so many years. You have headed this profession in India. You have been a member of the IFAC board. The accounting standards keep on changing. The disclosure requirements keep on increasing. After, especially in AS, we have converged with the IFRS. The amount of disclosures which we have, the sheer volume of notes being put in, plus the convergence which we have of our auditing standards with the ISAs, wherein now everything virtually we are almost at par. We have brought in new auditing standards like key audit matters, etc. That also needs to be given by the auditors. So when we have so much of accounting information, so many standards of audits to follow, why do you still feel, what do you feel like actually, is that this perception about this gap existing to meet the expectations, why after this is still there? What more do you believe, or should we make it less complex and straightforward so that people can actually understand the nitty-gritty that this has been done, rather than allowing them to go through a 80 or 90-page financial statement document with all disclosures, director reports? How do you feel that, what should be the way forward in this?
Thank you, Pankaj ji. I believe what institute and accounting profession has done a marvelous job, developing the technique, improving the accounting principles, standards, policies, auditing, etc. But the issue is that all that has been done in-house, and outreach activity has not been to that level, so that what we have done over a period is, we have increased the expectation of the society, and we have not been able to tell the society and to reach out to the society, look, this is an area which will not fall within the scope of the auditors. So the important aspect I say is, it is as you rightly use the word, perception. The perception has to be addressed by an outreach activity, whereby each section of the society, whether it is a society per se, a user of the statement, or a bank, a financial institution, or a regulator, etc., they need to be made very clear in terms that what they expect from the auditors is this limited scope and not a what we call a guarantee or insurance. That's a major challenge. We have developed technique, and that is where the important task of the, I believe, ICAI and other regulator, I believe, accounting bodies, and particularly IFAC is required. Though we have been conversing that there is expectation gap. Now, simply saying I will say the layman words, what should be there. The way we give an example, we should work out few analogy and example, that in case this thing happen, then auditor is not responsible. This does not fall in auditor responsibility. We make out a template saying that, look, these are 10, 20, 30 areas. If this happened with the account and this is the something happened, then auditor is not, doesn't fall within the domain of the auditor. Now, PNB, these cases there are few examples where we can work it out on this basis. Something which is happening off balance sheet, which by putting the normal radar which an auditor puts in, could not be judged and could not be detected. That's beyond that area. But public is not aware. With the result, what happened is, the moment so many crises happen, immediately audit is the first scapegoat. He is focused. You have failed. Without even going to the fact what has happened and why it has happened. Auditor is first taken care of. So that is what I say. The first foremost thing is to address that perception.
I think, but that the situation is that the failures are always public and in the media, but the defense is always private. And that's the problem which the auditors always have. But
I will say
can't.
Media also goes with the public perception, because media people are also the society people. So in case we are able to put in public domain, in the reach out seminar and other areas, make out some common area. You see, these are the issues which we auditor, it doesn't fall in the, we say no, in audit report, this is internal matter, you please read the financial with my notes, my comment. Public is not able to understand like this. They say, sir, you have certified. Unless you have put a complete red flag, I have not signed, we believe this organization is correct and doing very well. You may have written 20-page notes, people do not look into. So that is why I say, one should say that this does not cover, that should be in public domain.
Agreed. Madam President, recently your institute signed a collaboration agreement to partner with a software company to develop financial data analytics, especially to provide members with artificial intelligence-based technology platforms, which will help firms of all sizes in their tax, advisory, and audit businesses. I believe they're also collaborating to incorporate this technology as a part of the CA qualification, with the aim of embracing technology as one of the main skills. What do you believe in terms of embracing technology? What countries like India, how could they benefit by such type of use of technology to try and do a better audit in terms of this digital world which we are living in, and how you can make them digital ready in terms of the audit profession?
Okay, well, I can tell you what we're doing in the UK, and then, you can think whether it would work in India. Yes, we have recently signed an agreement with a software house called Inflow. But I think, first of all, I'll just tell you where we are. At the moment, we have quite a lot of tech is examined in 13 out of our 15 exams. So we already examine students' understanding and use of things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, the Internet of Things, awareness of cybersecurity and cybercrime. This is already examined under our syllabus. But what we have now done, we are going to put actual doing data analytics into some of our exams. So during the exam, the students will be given data. They will be expected to use the Inflow software to generate results, and then they will need to be able to analyse and interpret those results. So the sort of work that hopefully they will be doing in practice in their firms, they will be able to replicate in the exams, and it will be tested, because we feel that we really need to generate people who are not just chartered accountants and business advisors, but who are comfortable with handling and analysing data as well. We feel that the accountant of the future needs to be a data analyst as well. What is happening with the firms? All of the big firms are already using data analytics. They're doing 100% testing of things like sales and purchases, and then they get the outliers and the exceptions, and those are the ones that they audit and study. And I think what this is doing is it's actually making audit a lot more useful, because I think the errors and the outliers they're finding are not necessarily errors that would affect the audit opinion, but sometimes they're throwing up inefficiencies, or they might be throwing up that, somebody always comes in on a Sunday to sign purchase orders. I mean, that might be fine. They might have flexi working, but it's the sort of thing that you ought to ask. Why are they wanting to do this when the office is empty and nobody's watching them? So it's almost throwing up a lot of internal audit information, which, when presented to the client, is very, very useful. Now, smaller firms and medium-sized practices, I work with small and medium practices on audit and improving audit quality. Generally, they are not using data analytics at the moment. I know one or two who are using it to question journal entries and look at journals, but very, very few are using data analytics. So the deal that the ICAW has done with Inflow is our practices are now going to be able to use Inflow free for 11 months. And then after 11 months, they're going to have to pay for it. So we hope that's a way of encouraging firms to use it and get used to it and realizing its value before they have to start paying for it. So I think that's quite an interesting model. We're doing what we can to try to help our smaller practices who are obviously not going to develop their own software. And maybe it's a model you would like to look at using here in India.
I'm quite sure that the ICI dignitaries are listening to this. Probably they can, catch you later and ask you exactly what more they can do to bring it in India. Sir, you had mentioned in your slide regarding India refusing to sign the regional comprehensive economic partnership in Asia, which Mr. Modi had gone for, especially to protect the stakeholders of rural India. I think, I believe the pressure really came from your federation. If you can just share this big moment of what India has done and why it was done, if you can just have a few words from you on this.
There was no pressure. It is actually all the stakeholders, about 100 million milk producers represented their viewpoint. And what was that? This is basically RCEP, free trade agreements, or earlier WTO. What are these? What we feel, these are the tools invented by so-called developed or rich economies to exploit the markets of developing or the poor countries. They have invented, every time they come out with new, and this time they say you have to be part of global value chain, so you have to enter this, that. I mean, all these jargons, words they use. 16 countries, they wanted India to sign, and it was going well. When we came to know, see, they wanted New Zealand or Australia. New Zealand is producing 14 times more milk than what they can consume. And 95% is surplus. All over world, they were not growing. Prices were going down. Their farmers are not able to prepay to the banks the loan taken. And here India, which is the world's largest market, fastest market, they want to exploit. India, dairy products are allowed. Duties are there. Like world over, there's no country in the world where there are no duties on dairy products. Whether it take USA 70%, Canada 200%, all countries. But they wanted India to import dairy products from New Zealand at zero duty. So we said, if you import dairy products from New Zealand, 10,000 farmers of New Zealand will get their income double, which we are trying to say. But Indian farmers or dairy product income will halve. So you decide. And when we made this awareness known everywhere, all the farmers, I mean, I tell you in Gujarat, 10 lakh women farmers, they wrote postcard to the Prime Minister of India that your government has done good job and provided a source of livelihood, but this action will deprive of. And I'm really thankful to the government of India. They understood our viewpoint. And we decided not to get into this. And I think in the future also such type of, I'm not talking about dairy. You see, any trade or business consists of three parts: capital, natural resources, and human power. They want free trade of their natural resources, their capital. But when we said, okay, if you are allowing dairy to come here, please allow 3.6 million families of Gujarat to come to New Zealand. But that is our thing.
Great.
So
Thank you, sir.
That's what we will agree.
Thank you for protecting the interests of all the rural. So we are really running out of time, and I think I'll just pose the last question to Mr. Ved Jain. Sir, there are a lot of talks about integrated reporting. There is an International Integrated Reporting Council, which recently was hosted by IFAC. There are a lot of thoughts within the type of reporting corporates should do, and whether there should be involvement of independent experts other than auditors to give opinions on especially non-financial matters like key performance indicators, etc. What would you believe should be done without losing the relevance, obviously, of the audit profession?
Chairman, sir, I have two views on this. As I said earlier, in our anxiety to increase our scope of the profession, we should not venture into area which is not our domain. In case we are going to give an opinion on issues which are not our main domain, and we use the opinion experts, other opinion experts on that area which they are, the ultimate responsibility will be on the accounting profession, not on that expert. Today also, I believe the auditor is required and is also entitled to seek the benefit or opinion of the expert on the issue which he believes he need. If there is a legal issue, you can go to a call an advocate or the consultant to advise what is the liability likely to happen. If there is other issue, technical, scientific, other issue, then he is supposed to take the opinion. Now, in integrated reporting, the ultimate responsibility will fall back upon that person who is certifying that accounts. And if that happens, that is the additional responsibility which the accounting profession is assuming. So as I said when I was delivering talk on an earlier question is, the accounting profession need to draw a line which is the main domain and which is the expertise where we can express opinion and we are confident what we are saying is correct. Otherwise, what will happen is tomorrow something going wrong in an area which is other than that area, something going wrong, then again the liability will fall back upon. Same issue which Madam was discussing about the technology use was, I say. So far, the use of the technology is concerned for the betterment and better delivery of the scope which fall within my domain, absolutely no issue. We should use and we should go on using the technology increasingly. But it may not happen in our anxiety to use more technology. We assume the new role of a technical expert, and in their area, falling in that area, the profession has to take it back. So my suggestion will be public perception need to be addressed because, as I say, expectation from the stakeholders, which have increased now to a very large extent, that not only the shareholder or the promoter. We need to focus on that area. How do we, I will not say narrow down, how do we bridge this gap? One area we put pressure more on our accountants that they do perform and there is no case of a gross negligence or something criminal breach of trust. At the same time, the society will not expect that what has been said, there is bound to be some area which can still be left out. That's the area, Mr.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. I'm quite sure that there are many, many questions we can ask the great panelists we have here, but obviously time is a big constraint. So I need to probably close this session. I must thank all the luminaries, the great panelists here, for having a discussion with me and really giving a lot of insights about the audit profession and the stakeholder expectations. Now, over to the Master of Ceremonies.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. A big round of applause for all the panelists, please. Can I request respected Central Council member CA Charanjot Singh Nandaji to please come on the stage to felicitate Dr. R.S. Sodhi, please. Thank you, sir, for sharing the journey of the cooperative movement. Amul, the taste of India. A memento from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, expressing gratitude to Dr. R.S. Sodhi. I'd like to invite respected Central Council member ICI, CA Hansraj Chugji, to kindly come on stage and say thank you to Ms. Fiona Wilkinson. Thank you, ma'am. President, Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, shared her thoughts on the topic, how do we meet the expectation of the stakeholders. I'd like to invite Central Council member ICI, CA Satish Gupta ji to please come and present a memento to say thank you to CA Ved Jain ji. How can we bridge the expectation gap between auditors and the society? A group photograph for posterity. Thank you. Can I now invite respected Central Council member CA Durgesh Kabra ji to please come on stage and felicitate session moderator CA Pankaj Jain ji. Thank you, Pankaj ji, for moderating the exciting session. Wealth of knowledge has come out of it. Thank you. With that, we conclude this session. And of course, it's lunch in just a bit. Let me just quickly announce 5 avenues where you could really connect with exciting offers. I did tell you that Club Mahindra is offering 2 nights, 3 days package. So that's one. In addition to that, we will have the usage of technology to pick 30 more people who will get World Congress of Accountants gift hamper by ICI. So 30 lucky people will get these hampers by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Not only that, Bike Group of Hotels is proud to sponsor 2-night stay, and there'll be 1 voucher that'll be given each for destinations like Shimla, Manali, Matheran, Goa, and Kollam. In addition to that, 5 gold coins worth not 100 grams, not 1,000 grams, just 1 gram. You heard it right? 5 gold coins worth 1 gram each by the Choice Group of Hotels. I think more than the wealth, it's a token of appreciation and thanks to each of the delegates who have invested a couple of days here at ICI's International Conference. But when will this lucky draw happen? This will happen late in the evening. And if you want to be one of the winners, make sure you're physically present in the session so that you can lay your hands on either of these packages. Thank you very much. I now invite my colleague CA Ashita Shah to take the proceedings forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit sir. You all will agree with me that CA Amit Arora has really done a wonderful job by taking us through each and every session in a very natural and fluent manner. Sir, please accept our heartfelt gratitude. As a token of gratitude, I request President CA Praful Chhached sir to please present a memento to CA Amit Arora. Amit sir. I request everyone to please
Friends, let me announce, Amit himself is a chartered accountant working with Doordarshan, and whenever we have mega program, it is, he takes the leave, he forgoes his salary and he is always with us. Yesterday only I was asking him how many times you get the rate sheet from your boss, but he said, sir, nothing, no, much more than profession. Thank you, Amit, for doing, wonderfully year after year for all of us.